everyone, and welcome back to another Kerbal Space Program video. And in today's Kerbal Space Program video, we're going to be doing one of my favorite things to do in this game. That is, recreate a ship from alternate history. And by that I mean we're going to take a rocket that was designed but never left the drawing board. And this time, we're going to be building the legendary Sea Dragon rocket. And, you know, a lot of people have requested me to make a Sea Dragon. It's one of my most requested video topics, in fact. So, hopefully you guys enjoy the next 20 minutes or so as we, do this. So, in terms of building the Sea Dragon, one of the most difficult things to do is the gigantic engine at the bottom of the stack. 5 meters is the biggest diameter for parts in this game, so that's the scale I'm using. But there are no 5-meter sized engines in Kerbal Space Program, and the next biggest engine after that is the Mammoth engine, which is far too small for the Sea Dragon. So what I've done, as you can see, is I've built a custom engine bell out of the fairing pieces, and I've sort of clipped a few Mastodon engines. I believe there's 6 Mastodon engines inside the engine bell itself, just to sort of act as a custom stock engine solution. I mean, I guess the easier way would be to use the Rhino engine and use a mod like Tweak Scale to make it bigger and more in line with what the Sea Dragon looks like, but I wanted to do it without mod, so this is the solution I've gone with. As for the upper stages, you can see me constructing them here. We have the big Rhino engine that will serve as the main engine of the upper stage, and you can see just below it I'm adding lots of parachutes. I clipped some inflatable heat shields into the lower stage just there, because one of the big things that the Sea Dragon would have been inflatable bags that would have slowed down the lower stage, allow it to land and potentially be reused. Not every kind of scenario in which the Sea Dragon was pitched included stage recovery, but a lot of concepts did, so that's why I've decided to incorporate that into the lower stage. So you can see me constructing here, we've got these 4 side-mounted engines here, which is like one of the more interesting design features of the Sea Dragon. And if you look at a artist's impression or schematic of a Sea Dragon rocket, you'll see that they're kind of encased in a little pointed aerodynamic housing, so I tried to mimic that look by using those triangular wing pieces just there. As for the upper stage, it's just going to be like an Apollo-looking command module. It's going to go to the moon. It's going to be a direct ascent mission as well, because while the Saturn V was too small for a direct ascent moon mission, the Sea Dragon was not. It was an absolute behemoth of a rocket, and it would have like a direct ascent moon landing could well be within its limits if it was ever built, which it wasn't, so we'll never know. And who knows if it would have been rated for humans. I mean, the whole point of the Sea Dragon was that it'd be really, really quick to build, really, really cheap to build as well. The idea was that it would get built at a seaside shipyard. It would be made out of relatively cheap and durable materials, stainless steel sheeting, that sort of thing. And there was going to be very, very wide margins for error with the engineering to ensure that it would be as reliable and reusable as possible. I love it. It's one of those Kerbal rocket designs ever. And as you can see, I've now got it in the water, being towed along by 2 boats, because the Sea Dragon was so massive, it would have obliterated its launch pad if it were launched from the land. And obviously, being such a big rocket, it would have to be very, very far away from literally anything, because it would have been so loud. And again, the flame from that enormous first engine stage would have just destroyed. It would have been very destructive, basically. So launching it from the sea was the only option, really, hence why it's called the Sea Dragon. Here you can see me towing it out just here. You may have noticed that we've got quite a substantial amount of ore tanks at the back, and the reason those are there is because when we get to our, launch site, which isn't going to be too far, I'm not going to spend ages towing it out to sea, I'm just showing you the concept here. Once we get to our launch site, we're going to need to flip it into a vertical position, which means we need some sort of ballast at the back that'll weigh the ship down from the back and flip it into the vertical takeoff position. So I've got ore tanks here. The real Sea Dragon would have used just water tanks. So it would have got to its location it needed to go to. The tanks would then fill with water and sink the engine bell down, aligning the rocket into the right position. You can see one of the ships has flipped over a little bit. We didn't want that to happen. I just the illusion of the ships towing the Sea Dragon along has sort of been shattered in that moment. I literally just attached them radially to the Sea Dragon rocket and then used the offset tool to drag them forwards a bit to make it look like they were towing it, but now we've decoupled them. The illusion falls to pieces. So we can just quickly recover them and get to the launch of the Sea Dragon. Now, as I said, in reality, the Sea Dragon would have just had a big empty tank there that would then fill with seawater and drag it down. We can't do that in Kerbal Space Program. So instead, I'm just going to use HyperEdit to just fill those tanks with ore. I could have done it manually, but it would have taken a very, very long time. We've got 110,400 units of ore that we need to fill, so I thought let's just use HyperEdit to fill them quickly, because again, this is just meant to simulate a water tank filling with seawater. So I feel like in this instance, it's an acceptable use of HyperEdit, and really, you know, the key feature of this video is the rocket itself, not the ballast that flips it the right way up. So hopefully you guys can forgive me on this one. Anyway, we're now going to watch it flip itself up, which was a very, 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 very slow process. I've sped the video up 12 times faster than normal speed, and as you can see, I've also got 4 times physical time warp on as well. So it took a while to get flipped up into the correct position, but I didn't want to rush it. I didn't want it to flip too quickly because I don't want it wobbling itself to pieces, things breaking, anything else that we don't want. But Jebediah, Bill, and Bob, we want them to be safe for their historic moon mission aboard this absolute monstrosity of a rocket. Anyway, I think we're not really that far from landfall, are we? I think we're pretty much ready to launch this thing. We're going to do a nice cinematic zoom down. You can see, oh, I get chills seeing it like loom ahead, just coming out of the blue. Anyway, first thing we're going to do is press number 1 on our keyboard. Well, we're going to turn the engines on first, but then we're going to press 1 on our keyboard action groups. That's going to deploy those struts that are holding it in place. We're then going to separate the ballast tank. We're then going to breach the surface, and as we do, we can fire up that massive lower engine, or in this case, the 6 Mastodon engines hiding inside a fairing, and we can begin our ascent. And as you can see, this thing is very, 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 very powerful. The payload isn't particularly huge, to be fair, but nonetheless, we have got a fair old amount of thrust going. You can see our surface speed is flying up, as are we. So I'm just going to throttle down to just 50% throttle to make sure this thing doesn't go too fast too soon. At the end of the day, if you go way too fast in the lower atmosphere, then you're just going to waste a load of fuel just fighting the air resistance. It makes more sense to kind of go at a slower pace and not waste so much time fighting heat resistance. I made a little quick save just there because I'm going to showcase the stage recovery here. So we've got those drogue chutes there, and as they deploy, you can also press action group 3, I believe, or action group 2 actually. And that will deploy the inflatable heat shields, and this thing can then coast down to the sea. And then once we get a little bit lower, those, well, they've now deployed, those main chutes they have deployed, and it reduces our descent speed down to a nice, safe velocity. Or at least so I thought. As you can see, the engine bell did not survive. In fact, it pinged and it multiplied and it made 6 new engines. So that's what engines do when they reach the end of their life. They jump into the sea and they multiply. I don't really know what I'm trying to say here, but anyway, we can go back to that quick save I made and then continue with the flight, because unfortunately a recovery of that nature is not possible in stock Kerbal Space Program. We have to kind of do a quick save, and I can just show you it being recovered, but then we have to quick load back to where we quick saved and continue with the flight, expending the lower stage. I mean, it's fine. Lowne Aerospace, we're a wealthy company, and you know, it's science mode in Kerbal Space Program, so funds are not an issue. So we've got those big arms just there with the RCS thrusters on that upper stage. They're just going to keep ourselves nice and steady. Our thrust weight ratio, despite the 5 engines, is not great here, so we have to hold a fairly steep angle of attack for quite a while, actually, to make sure our apoapsis ends up leaving the atmosphere. We don't end up just getting to apoapsis and then falling back down to Kerbin. But, you know, our apoapsis is now 100 kilometers, which is a nice, safe altitude. We can just, I guess that's it. We can just deploy the launch escape system just there. We no longer need that. And then we can just cruise, you know. We've got just about 10 kilometers to go before we reach space. So we can just shut down those 4 peripheral engines and get ready to fire that Rhino. We're going to make a maneuver node to the moon. Ah, what a twist. But which moon are we going to? Well, it seemed silly to just waste a rocket like this going to Kerbin's Mun, because, you know, it's a huge rocket. We've got so much Delta V. We could do so much more. So why not go to a different planet's moon? Juna's moon. Let's go to Ike, because we like Ike here at Lowne Aerospace. And I thought, I don't know, the twist seemed funny to me when I thought of it. Like, hey, I could blow everyone's minds. Maybe. I don't know. Now I say it out loud, it wasn't quite so funny. But hey, if you guys are enjoying this video, then I'm going to do a shameless plug. Why not leave a little like down below? Yeah, get a little like. Let's see if we can get 100 likes on this video, guys. Is that a realistic milestone? I don't really do this very often, so I'm not sure what kind of metrics my videos normally get when they're first uploaded. Regardless, it doesn't matter. We're doing our burn here. Now, I wanted to do just 2 burns with this lower stage because I'm like, I feel like if we're being realistic, that engine might be rated for like 2 burns, 1 to fire for the first time, and then 1 to circularize the payload. So I thought, let's just try and get our Juno encounter done in 1 single burn. And then we kind of have that, you know, headcanon of the engine's only rated for 2 burns. But unfortunately, the reliability of KSP's maneuver node system is not always that great, particularly for very fine-tuned burns, if that makes sense. Like, this burn requires a high level of precision that the maneuver node maker simply can't do. Like, you can plot the maneuver node, but when you actually do the burn, it never really aligns up exactly how you want it. So for things like this, which require a lot of finesse, it doesn't really work too well. So unfortunately, I had to do quite a few little burns just here to get our collision course with Juno. So forgive me there. But I thought, you know, at least the maneuver node was there. Everything was there. We had everything we needed. It was just the piloting that fell short a little bit. So this rocket can technically do its mission with that upper stage firing only twice. Was what I'm trying to say here. Now, you may have heard me say we're trying to aim for a Juno collision course, and that wasn't a verbal typo or anything like that. I actually do want our orbital trajectory to take us straight into the center of the red planet, and the reason for this is because I don't want to have this lower stage drifting in space forever and eternity, you know? We want to make sure it gets safely deorbited somehow. So let's just crash it into Juno. So that lower stage will coast all the way to Juno with us, but it will crash straight into the planet and be destroyed. I mean, it will be completely obliterated, right? I mean, it's coming at interplanetary speed at a near vertical collision course, so it should be a fairly safe bet that it's going to get destroyed. Now we can time warp up to Juno. So we've got our encounter pretty much, but of course we've got our encounter with Juno's sphere of influence, but we need to get an encounter with Ike now because we're not going to be landing on Juno itself. I don't think we've got enough Delta V in this lander to do Juno. I mean, if we do, it would be very, very tight, and I don't think we do. That being said, we do have a refueling base in low Juno orbit, so it was an option. In fact, I did think about doing that after I'd done my Ike landing. I was like, you know what, maybe we could do a cheeky little Juno landing as well, but I didn't want the video to be dragged out too long. At the end of the day, the main focus of the video was the launch vehicle itself, which is now long gone, so let's not waste. We don't have to drag it out, spend ages in space. We can just do a cheeky little Ike mission, do a little bit of science, get our Kerbals and a nice EVA, stretch the legs, and then we can head back to Kerbin and call it a day, have a nice glass of whiskey. So, small correction burn needed to get our Ike encounter, only 2.2 meters per second, so very, very minimal. And the game's crashed there, we go. I was having quite a lot of, is it garbage dump? Is that what it's called? You know, the game just stutters and freezes constantly. I had to do a game restart, actually, to fix it, but that was just an interesting thing that happened. You can see my solar space station there has forever tarnished my map screen with that really weird eccentric sun orbit. That's my space station, if you guys want to watch that. Maybe I'll remember to put a card on screen if I remember, or in a link in the description. Again, if I remember, you can watch that. But it was a video in which I put a space station around the sun, and you know, that was a nice video. I hopefully, if you enjoyed this video, you'd like that too. I don't know. I guess I'm just trying to stall for time, guys, because not a lot's happening on screen. But that's over now. We now have stuff to talk about again. We have encountered Ike. As you can see, we've got a direct connection to the Kerbal Space Center as well, which is great. In fact, I'm not sure if it is direct, but that antenna, that satellite dish on the side of the spacecraft is strong enough to reach Kerbin from this distance. But we've also got that space station in low Juno orbit as well, which we can use as a relay. In fact, it looks like from my brief view of the map screen just there that that's what's happening. Although this antenna, whilst it's very close, it can reach Kerbin, but it'll be a much weaker signal, I imagine, than if the lander just uses the space station as a first hop, because the space station has a gigantic relay dish, which means the signal is a little bit stronger. Anyway, we're now going to start our landing burn. Now, I did make one mistake here. You can see on the nav ball there, it says orbit, just above the velocity indicator, when really it needs to be set to surface. Because our retrograde marker is not aligning with our surface speed. You can see I'm killing it off, but we've still got quite a lot of horizontal velocity here, despite the fact that our retrograde marker is slowly creeping towards the center of the nav ball, which means we're set to orbital mode. There we go. So setting it to surface mode, you can see now that retrograde marker pings back closer to the horizon, and as we follow it, we can now see that we bleed off our horizontal speed perfectly. I wanted our touchdown speeds to be fairly conservative, you know. These Kerbals want to have a nice smooth ride. They had a pretty rough launch, didn't they? Launching. So I think, you know, they deserve a nice smooth landing. And then we can go ahead and do our science. And I learned something about science today, actually. This was really interesting because I said in my looping back to the solar space station again, I said in that video that it's actually incorrect to refer to the sun in Kerbal Space Program as Kerbal, which most people do because, you know, that's kind of the name that the forums call it, and that's sort of become widespread in the community. But in the game, it's not actually ever called Kerbal. It's always called the sun. But someone on the KSP forums showed me that there is actually it's actually called Kerbal in the game. It is canon. I was wrong. I admit I'm not wrong very often. I thought I was wrong once, but it turned out I was mistaken. But yeah, the Doodling Astronaut says that if you do an ice chunk analysis on Elu, the science readout says Elu's distance from Kerbal means that nearly anything will freeze here. So there we are. Kerbal is confirmed canon, it would seem. So there you are. If that's because it was added with Breaking Ground, and so they got like newer devs now, and so they didn't know that Kerbal was just the fan name, but there we are. I guess now I can refer to it as Kerbal, and if people try and correct me saying, actually, it's only called the sun, I can be like, nah, I was one of you too. But it turns out that the game does in fact refer to the sun as Kerbal, at least in the Elu Ice Chunk Analysis science readout. It probably has a couple of other mentions here and there that I haven't checked or seen before, but there we are. Fun fact that I learned today about Kerbal Space Program. You see, you know, everyone, you know, you can never get to a stage where you just can't learn anything new. There's always stuff to learn. There's always ways to improve in life. That's my deep philosophical point of the video here. As we do our, I feel like I didn't really talk about Ike at all, did I? Just them, and I suppose there's not much to talk about, is it really? It's just a big grey rock. Although, very pretty grey rock. I really am still in love with the texture revamps that Juna and Ike received, as well as a few other celestial bodies in the Kerbal system, I should say. And I can call it the Kerbal system now, not the Kerbal Space Program solar system, which is a bit of a mouthful. I personally can't wait for Elu and Tylo to get facelifts. It's really nice that Lathe got a facelift. I still need to revamp Life on Lathe, don't I? I mean, I kind of did. I did the first episode where we said to Dragonfly quadcopter to Lathe, but then I never did anything since. So it's coming, guys. I just have other stuff to do, like Sea Dragon launches, and hopefully this was an acceptable compromise over Life on Lathe this week. But do not worry, Life on Lathe will return. It's just I'm trying to figure it all out, you know, like what to do. Like I'd like to have a big land base. I'd like to have a big sea base. I want a helicopter. I've decided there's going to be a helicopter, and the land base and the sea base are going to have helipads so that it can like hop between them. Or maybe we could even have like a stock, what's it called? Osprey. Is it the Osprey? The Boeing craft by the US military have, where it's sort of a plane and then the wings rotate. It's like a helicopter. I'm sure it's called the Osprey. It's one of those facts where like you know it and it's really obvious, but then in the heat of the moment when you're trying to do a commentary, you can't pause, right? Most good commentators would pause. In fact, they would probably write a script beforehand with all the talking points they need to cover, rather than having to rush through everything in a mad panic because the footage is playing back at fast motion on screen, like I do, for example. Anyway, we're on our way back to... so just to wrap up that point, that's one thing I was doing. Maybe a helicopter, maybe an Osprey. That's what I mean. I just got to sit down and think about it and decide what I want and then just, you know, execute. So Life on Lathe is coming, but I want to make sure it's done right, you know? Anyway, here you can see we have our Kerbin encounter all sorted. I was trying to get I was aiming for sort of a 30-kilometer periapsis, but as you can see, even with the monopropellant thrusters, they're still too like twitchy. They're still too high, and the thrust weight ratio is still too high to do fine-tuned maneuvers. So I had to drop the thrust down to just 2% on those RCS blocks to get the level of accuracy required to get to the periapsis that I wanted, but it was fine once we did that. It was pretty easy. And then we can time warp around to our Kerbin encounter, where we can obviously enter the atmosphere and hopefully land. And we can review all of the science that we managed to gather on our little trip to... I was about to say Elu for some reason. On our little trip to Ike. And there is Kerbin looming ahead. So what I could do right now is decouple that lower stage to make sure it has enough time to drift away nice and safely, so we're not gonna risk crashing into it. But that's just not exciting, is it? I do like decoupling my lower stage at the very last second so we can watch some cool fireworks upon re-entry, although sadly today wasn't the case. It didn't explode, so kind of weird that it didn't. I mean, re-entry heating is not turned off or anything, so I'm not quite sure why it didn't. Bit of a disappointment, but oh well, we're nearly back anyway, and we aimed for the sea, and just to make a nice sort of splashdown, nice and safely. I imagine a sea dragon, or it was fitting, you know, we launched from the sea, we land in the sea. But this is also similar to how the Apollo capsules landed, and I imagine, you know, a lot of the concepts for the Sea Dragon featured an Apollo-style command pod at the top, so I would have thought it would also land in the sea. So we're kind of fulfilling both things really there. We're fulfilling the potential accuracy if this thing was ever built, but also in a nice sort of philosophical way, we're ending where we left off. Well, we're on the other side of the planet, but regardless, we're still, in a way, landing where we left off, and that's pretty much the mission done, to be honest. We've got our science there, just over 800 units of science, which is going to add to our score for this save file. And that's it. There's an end screen on screen with things to click if you want to click them. Left-hand side is a video chosen for you by YouTube's recommendation algorithm, however that works. I mean, you guys know how end screens work, so I don't need to go through how they work again, right? Description for merch and social media and stuff. I'm going to leave it there. Goodbye.